What's going on, everybody? Tom here with Keto Lifestyle, and welcome to today's video. Now, today is going to be geared more towards the people that are just starting out keto, but if you've been doing it for a while and you're curious, please stick along. So the topic of today's video is actually going to be the things you need to know to start a ketogenic diet. And this is kind of the TLDR, or the Cliff Notes. I'm just going to explain what I would do and why I would do it based on my experience, and I'm not really going to go too far into depth about why or the science behind it. You can research that on your own. There are going to be longer videos if you're curious about that, but this is just to get you guys started that have not done this before. So to start things off, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my name's Tom. I've been following a keto diet for roughly 3 years now. I started off at about 325 pounds and have tried every diet known to man. Keto is the one thing I could stick to, and currently I'm about 215, 216 pounds. I got as low as 200 last summer. So this is what I used to look like, and this is what I looked like last summer. I'm currently in a bulk right now, so I'm deliberately putting on a little bit of weight, which I'll take off here shortly. Now, before we get started, there are a couple things that I want to mention. First of all, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. If you feel like I didn't address them, I am going to be doing a Q&A video based off of this on my next video that's going to be coming out. So please feel free to leave any of your questions down there. And legal disclaimer here, I am not a doctor. The things that I mentioned here are just off of my own experience. They are things that I have personally done or I have found that worked for me. If a doctor is prescribing you keto, please follow exactly what they said. And also, if you're just going to start this, go ahead and check with your doctor to make sure you're healthy and there's no concerns with you starting a keto diet. With that, let's begin. There are also going to be timestamps in the description box if you want to jump around or just view topics that you personally are interested in. So to start things off, I want to talk about what exactly is a keto or a ketogenic diet. And by my definition, and you will find definitions that vary through all the spectrum, but by my definition, a ketogenic diet is when you are following a diet that has such restrictions in carbohydrates that your body falls into a natural state of ketosis, meaning that your liver will actually take fats and produce something called a ketone. Ketones are then an alternative energy source to glucose, which you would normally get through consuming carbohydrates. So, long story short, if you aren't eating a lot of carbs, your body makes ketones. If your body is doing that, I consider you to be following a ketogenic diet. So as I just casually mentioned, in order to get into a state of ketosis, you have to eat a severely carbohydrate restricted diet. Now, the one thing I want to mention here is that this takes a lot of time. It can take 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 days for some people of being on a carbohydrate restricted diet in order to fall into a state of ketosis. This is because your body has glycogen stores that it needs to burn off before you enter that state. Now, I don't care what anybody tells you, it's going to take time. You'll find some ketone supplements on the internet that'll tell you, oh, we'll get you into a state of ketosis in 30 minutes. They're just trying to sell you something. The thing is when you drink those, yes, you will have ketones in your blood, ketones in your urine, and it'll look like you are in a state of ketosis. But the reality of it is that the ketones are only there because you drank them. Your liver has not yet started producing ketones, so you're not actually making them naturally. You're just testing positive for the supplements that you took. Now, in terms of testing them, this is a very common question. A lot of people like to test their ketones, and early on, a lot of people use keto sticks or like pea strips. Now, those are great to see if you have any ketones in your system, but do not trust the readings on them. Anything such as hydration or different foods you've consumed can mess with that number. So if you are super hydrated and you're peeing pretty much clear, the strips are going to show a very, very low ketone presence. But a person in the same level of ketosis that is severely dehydrated is going to show a very, very heavy presence of ketones in their urine. So for that reason, I don't really like them. In terms of testing ketones, I like doing a blood test. Now, what I have here is a device called a Keto Mojo. I'm not affiliated with them or sponsored by them in any way, but this is what I personally use. Looks like this. You prick your finger, put a strip in there, and it tells you your ketone levels on there. They're a little bit expensive, so I don't really recommend doing this daily. People can obsess over numbers, and I don't think that you should obsess over the ketone value in your blood. It's kind of a meaningless thing, but it is good to know that you are in ketosis. But since the strips are about $1 a piece, maybe once every few days I'll check it, but definitely wouldn't recommend it daily just because it's going to add up in cost very, very quickly. So if it's something you want to do, go for it, but don't obsess over that number. Now, along the same lines as getting into ketosis, I want to talk a little bit about cheating on keto. And I made a video about this last week, but I feel like I didn't make my point very clear. Cheating on keto is especially bad because when you break ketosis or you have a lot of carbs and your body exits ketosis, it's going to have to burn off all that glycogen before it re-enters ketosis again. So if you have a really, really carb-heavy day, it could take you 3 or 4 days to get back into ketosis. Now, this may not necessarily bother you if that's your goal, but for some people like myself that prefer to stay in a state of ketosis year round just because of a general feeling of well-being, I'll feel like garbage for 3 days, and I've noticed that it kind of halts my weight loss. So bear that in mind if you ever think about cheating on keto. Now that being said, there are some people out there who will do something called a refeed. I used to really believe in these, not so much anymore. What a refeed is every so often you'll have a bunch of carbs. The theory being that there's a hormone called leptin that's produced by your thyroid that controls hunger to some degree, and it needs carbohydrates to be produced. Now your body can make glycogen through other processes other than consuming carbohydrates, so I don't really subscribe to that theory anymore. But if that's something you're interested in, I used to do it about every 2 weeks. So when I'd break ketosis on a Saturday, I'd have a full day of eating whatever I wanted, and then I'd be back in it on Sunday, and it would take me till about Tuesday, Wednesday to get back into ketosis, and then I'd have, the remaining 12, 13 days in order to be in a state of ketosis and burn more fat. So if you want to do a refeed, that is something you can do. Personally, I don't recommend them anymore, but some people need it, especially for mental sanity. At first, maybe it helps you every 2 weeks, then move it to every month, then move it to every other month. But do whatever works for you. Now let's talk a little bit about macros. Now what macros are it's short for macronutrients. So you've got protein, carbs, fat, and alcohol. So you've got basically your protein and carbs are 4 calories per gram, fat's 9, and I believe alcohol is 7, but most people typically don't count alcohol. So the big 3 you're gonna look at is protein, carbs, fat. And depending on who you talk to, they will give you a different ratio. I've seen some people say as low as 60% fat. I've seen as high as 85% fat. This really comes down to personal preference. For me, I believe that around 75% fat works best for my body. I have seen some people, such as Robert Sykes, aka Keto Savage. He goes up to like 80% fat, and the guy's a professional bodybuilder. There are also guys from the Keto Gains community that believe as low as 60% fat. It really comes down to you, and you need to experiment in that range. So for me personally, I like to stick to around 75% fat, 20% protein, and about 5% carb. But the thing to keep in mind here is that you want those carbs to be as low as possible. So if I can get those down to 1 or 2%, maybe I'll up my protein a little bit, or I'll up my fat a little bit so that I hit my calories. But the reality of it is you want to keep those carbs as low as possible. Now, one thing that can help keep those low is counting net carbs. And again, myself personally, I count net carbs. So what a net carb actually is you take your total carbs, you subtract your fiber and your sugar alcohols. This is where it can get a little bit tricky and people can play games. Now, most fiber is safe to subtract because it's typically indigestible. There are some types of fiber that are digestible, but I don't worry about that too much. When it comes to sugar alcohols, that is where there's a lot of games to be played. There's so many different sugar alcohols out there, you really are just gonna have to research it and figure out if the one that in your product that you're consuming is a 0 glycemic index. So basically just Google the sugar substitute and go ahead and say glycemic index afterwards. And you should see a number on there. The closer you are to 0, the better. You'll have things such as like maltitol or maltodextrin that are not low on the glycemic index but are put as sugar substitutes in foods. That is a way that they're playing games. You are still going to get an insulin response. You are still going to get knocked out of ketosis. The sweeteners that I recommend are stevia, erythritol, and monk fruit. So I will typically subtract all of those from my carb count. But the purpose of this for me mostly is to encourage me to eat vegetables. A lot of vegetables do have carbs in them. I do stick to dark leafy greens, but there's still carbs in them. So by counting net carbs, I allow myself to have a little bit more spinach or a little bit more broccoli, which is ultimately going to help my vitamin levels. This clip got to be a little bit confusing when I originally recorded it, so we're going to try it again. Now the topic at hand is finding your calories, and there's really no exact formula to do this. It takes a bit of experimentation. But what I recommend is starting off with something called your TDEE, or Total Daily Energy Expenditure. Now your TDEE can be found by going on Google and typing in a TDEE calculator. There are going to be a ton of them, but they all work roughly the same, so just pick your favorite one. Go ahead and answer the questions honestly. This is only going to work if you punch in the proper information, and it's going to spit out a number. Now the number it gives you is going to be the calories you should consume if you want to maintain your exact weight. Since we're probably trying to lose weight, we're going to start by subtracting 300. And if you're bulking, you're going to add. Another simpler way is just to take 10 times your body weight. That is what I find to be a good starting point. No matter which method you choose, you're going to want to monitor your weight every day for about 2 weeks and see if you're still losing weight. If you haven't lost any weight or it's been stalled for a week, try dropping it by 100. And as you lose weight through the process of your diet, whether it be over the course of weeks or months, the more weight you lose, the less calories you are going to need. So as you're losing weight, you're going to want to subtract from that anyway. So when you hit a plateau, drop those calories just a little bit. And now that we have an idea about our calories and our macro ratios, let's talk about calculating the grams that we need to eat of each type of macro. So these are percentages of calories, not of grams that you consume. This is a common mistake to make as well, but most cell phone apps will do this for you. If you punch in the ratios, it'll automatically convert the or the calories to grams. But if you want to do it by hand, here is how it is done. So say we're going to take my macro ratio, so 75% fat. You're going to take your total calories times 0.75, which gives you 75% of the total calories you consume, and divide that by 9, 9 being the number of calories in 1 gram of fat. This will give me the total grams of fat that I can consume. Protein being the same way. You take the total calories times zero point 0.2, which will give me 20% of my total calories. Divide that by 4 since there are 4 calories per gram. Again, most apps will do this for you, but for those of you that are curious, this is how it is done by hand. For tracking your macros, I typically recommend that you do something in your cell phone as opposed to writing it down by hand because it can be a little bit tricky. I use an app called Carb Manager. It's available on Android. I'm not sure if it's available on iPhone, but I like it because it seems to have pretty accurate macros according to the back of the packaging that I'm looking at, and it has a barcode scanner that allows me to do it. You can also set up your custom macro percentages for free, which is something you can't do on a lot of other apps. So check that out if you are interested. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I do think they make a pretty good product. So now that we have an understanding of what our macro ratios are going to be like, let's talk about your food choices, because this is going to be very important. Now, the thing that most people struggle with early on is getting their protein way too high by accident, and that's because they're not eating the right meats. Meat choice is very important. Something like a boneless, skinless chicken breast is going to be very high in protein and very low in fat, which is ultimately going to make it very hard to get your fats in for the day. You're going to end up having to consume fat bombs or keto coffee, something to boost those fats kind of artificially. Personally, I like to try to integrate them into my meal as I'm going throughout the day. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I provide a ton of recipes, and my website that's going to be linked right here and in the description, I have a ton of recipes on there as well. There are also several other YouTube channels such as Keto Connect and Headbangers Kitchen that provide a lot of keto recipes. And early on, some of those are going to be really great to follow because you can go through and just get a list of ingredients, if you're not familiar with ingredients, and just follow it and get your macros pretty much on point as long as you plan it ahead of time. If you're trying to do things yourself and not follow a recipe, typically I'm going to recommend something like a really fatty cut of steak and some type of green vegetable, maybe put some butter on it. Whatever you need to do to get those macros right. But I think following those recipes early on is actually going to help you out a lot because you can just go through a week ahead of time and plan out each meal, plan out your macros for each day, and order all necessary ingredients that you need. Now, if you guys have not ordered any ingredients yet and you're not sure what kind of the typical keto pantry looks like, there's also going to be a link in the description that's going to take you to a store that I set up where it just links you and can show you all the ingredients that you need. And that's kind of a great place to start because that has almost every ingredient that I've used in any of my recipes on there. So pick and choose what you need. Meal prepping can also be very important, so plan out your lunches. Sometimes I'll just take some macadamia nuts, sometimes I'll have a keto meal from American Metabolics, depending on what I feel like that day. A lot of times I won't even eat lunch or breakfast for that matter, but we'll get into fasting a little bit later. But one of the things I will tell you right now is if you're sitting at the office and you have no food and somebody's asking you to go out to lunch with them or they're sitting there eating something that's very fragrant, it's gonna mess with you at first. The best thing to do is to have something on hand that you can quickly eat and satisfy yourself. Now this does go into eating out a little bit. And early on, I really don't recommend eating out on a ketogenic diet. If you have to, the best thing to do is to pull up the restaurant's nutrition menu ahead of time and figure out exactly what you're gonna get and exactly how you're going to have to modify it. But that being said, the nutrition menu only helps so much. If you take a bunless burger, the nutrition menu is usually not going to tell you what that burger is without the bun. So you're going to have to do some guesstimating, which makes it a little bit tricky for you to actually know the kind of macros you're consuming. So early on, when you're first starting out and you want to be exact on everything, go ahead and just eat in your house as much as you possibly can. I know that's a pain in the butt, but a few weeks, once you're used to things, you have a better feel of the diet, it'll become a lot easier and you can just kind of guess what those macros are going to be like. So now that we kind of have the basics of what a keto diet is and how you're going to do it, let's talk about what to expect across your first few days of keto because there are certain things that you need to know. First of all, you are going to pee a lot more and you're going to have to drink a lot more water. I typically drink about a gallon a day, but drink when you're thirsty and make sure that your urine is almost clear. That's going to be my main recommendation there is make sure you are hydrated, otherwise you're going to feel sick, you're going to have headaches. Another thing that you're going to need to make sure is that you're getting enough electrolytes. Now, these are basically sodium, potassium, and magnesium. If you're not getting enough, you are going to feel like garbage, and you're going to have what they call the keto flu, which is typically diarrhea, headache, various symptoms. but it's basically just an electrolyte deficiency from your body changing into a new diet. So what I typically recommend is some type of magnesium supplement. This is one from a company called Nutrion. They're pretty cool guys. They sent me this a long time ago, but I still take these every day, 2 of these a day. And it's about 400 milligrams of caffeine. This is a magnesium glycinate, which is the most readily absorbed form of magnesium. So if you are going to do a magnesium supplement, recommend getting a magnesium glycinate. The next thing that I recommend, and I have one of these every morning, is something called Zip Fizz. People will debate all day long whether or not Zip Fizz is keto. I've never noticed anything in it. It has something called a glucose polymer in it, which depending if they use an alpha chain or a beta chain, depends if it's actually soluble or not, and they don't publish that information. But from what I've seen, it does not spike my insulin, so I go ahead and stick with these. But what a Zip Fizz is, it's actually a kind of like a vitamin energy drink. It's a whole bunch of different vitamins. There's even almost 1,000 milligrams of potassium, 100 milligrams of magnesium. The things that you need are in here, and there's also about 80 milligrams of caffeine to kind of wake you up. So this is my vitamin and my kind of like morning energy drink, if you will. Now what I'm missing here is sodium. So sometimes what I'll do in my Zip Fizz is I go ahead and put a couple shakes of salt in there. And the thing with that is it almost makes it taste like a Gatorade, but it is getting my sodium up. I also heavily salt my food. It seems obnoxious, but with the amount of water that you're drinking on a ketogenic diet and the fact that you don't have any glycogen to store the water, what ends up happening is all those electrolytes flush right through your system, so you need to replace them. I know people are typically under the impression that salt is not good in your diet, but on a ketogenic diet, you need it. Don't worry about it. Sometimes I'll even throw a half teaspoon in my mouth before going to the gym. You need it to keep you energized. The next topic that I want to bring up is fasting or intermittent fasting. I'm a big fan of fasting. Currently, I'm like 85 hours into a 96-hour fast. I know that sounds insane, but I like to do those things for myself, and it kind of resets my relationship with food, because when I start feeling myself get to a point where it's like I mentally believe that I need food all the time, I'll do this to kind of allow myself to realize that I don't. Not recommending it, but it is something cool if you guys are ever in that situation. What I'm talking about for the ketogenic diet is a lot of people will couple it with something called intermittent fasting, and depending on who you talk to, they'll change the fasting hours. A typical one is like 18 hours of being fasted, 6 hours of eating. The best way to do that is basically just skip breakfast, have a late lunch, and then your dinner. The reason for this is that it's easier to eat a smaller amount of calories in a shorter amount of time. So if you're spreading it out across 6 meals, you can only have maybe, for an 1,800 calorie diet, 300 calories a meal. And while that may be something that a lot of bodybuilders do, if you're trying to lose weight, I typically prefer to have my meals closer together. That way, I don't eat as many calories, because I'm going to want to eat a lot in one sitting. So myself personally, I'll do something called OMAD, O-M-A-D, 1 meal a day. And around dinner time, I'll probably consume 1,800, 2,000 calories when I'm cutting. When I'm bulking, it's going to be like 2,500, 3,000, and I may have 2 meals that day. But the point of intermittent fasting is that you will be able to consume more calories in one sitting and feel fuller. And when you've been adapted on a ketogenic diet for a while, fasting is not hard. You really don't get hungry. But early on, this might not be the case. So I realize I've given you a ton of information here, and this can be a little bit tricky to comprehend at once, and I know I've given you just the bare minimum. But what I want to bring up here is don't stress everything at once. I don't recommend going straight into keto and straight into fasting and straight into the gym. You're going to just confuse yourself. It's going to be hard to grasp on everything. So what I believe is you should probably start with just the diet. And if you're already in a gym routine, hey, keep doing that. But if you're not doing anything, my recommendation is start with a ketogenic diet. Maybe even start by just counting carbs and ignore the other macros. And then slowly start adding things in. At the end of the day, you're going to want to be doing a full ketogenic diet and working out if you want to lose the optimum amount of weight. You don't need to work out in order to lose weight on keto, but it definitely helps. But starting small will stop this from becoming an overwhelming process. How many people do you know that start a New Year's resolution and by 2 weeks in, they're done with it? They just couldn't handle it. That can happen. So once you've adjusted one portion of your life, it's easier to adjust another because that has now become habit. So start by watching your carbs if that's something you need to do. Then go ahead and watch your protein, fat, keep your calories low. I think that's a good step. Start with carbs, then add the rest of the macros in. Once you're comfortable with that, then maybe look into starting a gym routine. But eat when you're hungry. Now, when it comes to fasting, this is going to be something that I believe just comes naturally. You just won't be hungry, you won't eat. Eating when you're hungry is something that early on makes sense, it makes the diet sustainable, but as you're going further and further and further, you're just not going to get as hungry anymore. And that's kind of the point where I'm at. I don't even get hungry until about 36 hours at this point. But I eat because I want to make certain goals. Bottom line here, do what works for you, start slow, and see where it takes you, and add things as you need to. Now, one of the last things I want to talk to you guys about is the group of people that I typically refer to as the keto police. And this is the group of obnoxious individuals that will go over Instagram, Facebook, whatever blog you're looking at, and try to criticize what everybody else is doing. The problem with that is they don't know you, they don't know your body, and they don't know what actually works for you. So seriously, fuck them. My honest opinion of them is that they have nothing else better to do with their time than go around and try to put someone else down for something that is working for them. And those kind of people you don't want in your life. So my advice, honestly, stay out of all those Facebook groups. I have dropped out of all of them. Early on, I was in a lot of them and reading through it, and they just became super, super toxic. And you'll post something and the mods will get on you about how that doesn't follow their keto protocol. It just becomes very confusing, very stressful, and I just think that it's not the right thing to do. My advice is to go ahead and do your research on your own and kind of avoid these people that are just very, very crazy about it. Do what works for you. And as long as you're in a state of ketosis, you're on a ketogenic diet. Who cares what they say? Well, with that, guys, I think I have given you everything that you need to know to generally start a ketogenic diet. I do have a ton more information, and there's a ton of other videos on my channels. And additionally, I go ahead and release at least one recipe a week. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I'll notify you guys anytime I post something new. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave it a like. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section, guys. I'm going to be doing a Q&A video here coming up this week, so all of your questions will get answered there. With that, I will see you in the next one.